welcome back to another episode of Kassick's Corner, the podcast for literally anybody who wants to listen, but primarily for teachers, which is what I want to get into today. As I was, wrapping up my winter break and going back to school tomorrow, I'm actually doing a surprisingly good job with like not letting it all get to me. I'm just trying to enjoy my time as it is, because that kind of goes into what I'm going to talk about today a little bit, but also it's like this kind of helps ease the anxiety of it all because of the fact that I can just kind of like sit here and I can just like yap about all my anxieties and just kind of like let it go. So, thank you for indulging me in that. It's been a very relaxing break, and I guess that goes into what this topic is today because I wanted to talk a little bit about teacher burnout. And this is the first episode of 2025, by the way. The first one I'm recording in 2025, the first one I'm posting in 2025. This year is gonna be it. We're gonna do some good shit, you guys, and I can't wait to see what that looks like. And as I was thinking about like what to post, I was like, oh, I could do like teacher resolutions, or I could do like, what to take into the new year and what to like leave behind. But that just doesn't like really like seem like my energy. And what I felt like doing today was a lot more related to just the idea of like burnout, because I think there are a lot of stories that I have to tell. And now that I have this like platform to do it, I'm really excited to kind of like go into the stories that kind of like have defined me as a teacher and kind of like made me who I am as a teacher. So the thing I wanted to focus on today, as we get into like a brand new school year, as we get into like rounding it off, I want to talk about teacher burnout. And I was thinking about this because of the fact that I've been a teacher for this is my ninth year. This is my ninth year teaching, and this is the first winter break in my entire career as a teacher, in all 9 years, that I have not stepped foot into my classroom, that I have not worked on any schoolwork, that I have not thought about school. I thought about school, let's be real. But the first year in 9 years of being in this profession that I have not actively been working towards anything school related. And the way that I feel just totally like a brand new person after this break is crazy. And I think this is one of the tips too that I'll say later is like really enjoy really enjoying this break is has been like a just an amazing thing for me to just say I have time and space away from all of the things that I put pressure on ourselves for, that we all put pressure on ourselves for. And I think really taking the time, like literally for the first time in 9 years, that I did not work an inch, an ounce, a mere moment towards schoolwork. And I don't know, let me tell you, it it really changes you. So I just wanted to hold some space for that because we don't talk about that enough. I think we talk more about all the teachers going into work, and trust me, I was that guy for a really long time, and finally not needing to be that guy or wanting to be that guy and recognizing that it's time to not be that guy. I think it's really important to talk about the fact that like enjoy the time that you have off and go with it. So as I go through this episode, I think a lot of this is going to talk about like just the teaching profession in general, kind of like where it is. I actually have like a brief outline written down, so I don't just like yap uncontrollably for the next 45 minutes. So when I thought about doing this, I wanted to talk about kind of like where does burnout come from, right? Because I think in teaching it looks a little different, but everyone feels burnt out at some point, and I think there are different levels to everyone's burnout. But I wanted to talk specifically about where teacher burnout comes from. And then from there, I kind of want to talk about like what my experience was with burnout, and then how to notice burnout in other people. And then the last thing I kind of want to end with is then how can you kind of like avoid it, and I hope that all of these tips are not just, meant for teachers. While this podcast obviously comes from the perspective and focuses on like for teachers and by a teacher, the idea is that I want this information and I want this conversation to go somewhere much farther than just teachers, because I think everybody struggles with a lot of the same things, and just kind of opening up that conversation to say like, hey, life's hard for everybody, and just because I'm in this profession that like makes it just like a little bit harder doesn't mean that everyone else doesn't deserve to also think about it. So all that said, I kind of wanted to start with where burnout comes from teachers, and I have like a big soapbox for this. I feel like, and I'm gonna just jump right on that real fast. I think the biggest thing that gets teachers to feel burnt out and that gets teachers to feel just like that are like pulling at our last threads of anything is it comes from this idea of lack of value. And I'm going to get into this a lot more when I talk about like my own personal experience, but I think teachers in general whether it's by like their students, whether it's by each other, whether it's by society in general, whether it's by the admin that are in charge of us. I think that there is a large just lack of value for the work that we do. And like I said, this can be, stretched to many, many professions and not just to teaching, but I think there's this particular energy for this in teaching where it's like, oh, you guys get summers off, you get all this break time, you get all of this like free time just to exist and you get paid for it. And there's a lot of discrepancies there with like what really happens and what people believe. But it's this idea of regardless of what you believe and know about teachers, you're not valuing them for like what they are. And I think that's where burnout comes from. I think people can put up with a lot if they are given the space and the value that they deserve. But it's when they are, putting in that work, they are putting in that time, they are putting in that energy, is, I believe, not getting that value is that huge reason for where burnout comes from. And I think a lot of those expectations for teachers working hard come from like ourselves. I think teachers a lot of the time are very like perfectionist based people. They're very much like, I'm going to do the best job that I know how to do, and I'm going to make sure everything is taken care of perfectly because I know how to do it best. I think teachers very much just are people like that. They want to be successful and they know how to get themselves there. And that's like a hard thing to, just to stop doing, because I think those are the kinds of people that go into teaching that, want to help, that are very selfless, that will do the best that they can to be selfless and help others. And I think that's where that burnout comes from, is we will literally like burn all the ends of our own candlesticks just to make sure somebody else's is lit. And that's one of the core issues. And I don't know where that comes from. It's the people that get into teaching. It's what teaching has, evolved into over the time of its profession. But it's this idea of expectations, and whether they come from ourselves or others or people in charge of us. I think there's this natural tenacity for teachers just to say like, you know what, yeah, I'm just going to do it because that's what I have to do. And that's a really honestly kind of a toxic mentality, because at what point do you then realize that, one, what you're doing is not worth your own insanity, but also then realize that it's like, why am I even doing this in the first place, right? Like, teaching is just a job. And as much as that, you know hurts me to say, because as I get into it, I spent 9 years kind of like making it my entire life, and there's so many issues that come with that. And I think just realizing that, like, at the end of the day, it's really just a job. And a lot of people in the profession and in society in general, people who make decisions about teaching, they don't really recognize it as a job. They recognize it as a lifestyle. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have at play here, is just that expectation to be like, you signed up for this, you know exactly what you're getting into. And that doesn't mean it can't change, right? And that's kind of like the thing that I would like to push is like, just because all of these things are true and all of these things are the way that they are, it doesn't mean that they're not able to change. So where does burnout come from? It comes from this societal expectation. It comes from this personal expectation. It comes from the expectations of the job, just to say like, here are the things that you should be doing and you're going to do them. And I think it just naturally burns ourselves out. And the thing that always gets us through, and this is a thing that might be traumatizing for some teachers, is just, oh, but we do it for the kids. We do everything we do for the kids. And obviously, like, of course we do. Like, that is the job. That's why a lot of people sign up to the job, is because we're a part of something bigger than ourselves. We are actively making a difference in the world. We are impacting people beyond just our own experiences, and we are then able to like help grow society. We are able to help grow these things. That is the purpose for teaching. That is the reason we do all this shit, right? Is we put up with all this shit because of the fact that we are doing it for the kids. But that is like the core of where this burnout comes from, is because we can be forced to go to, lunch duties, after school duties, bus duty. We can be forced to go to, keep score at a basketball game. We can be forced to run a new club, host a new sport, clean up our classrooms when we're, in the middle of changing schools, or during the, halfway through the year. And it's just like, there are so many things that we put up with just because of the fact that it's like, it's for the betterment of the kids. And we know that, right? Like, teachers know that. And like I said, when I get into some personal experiences, that'll be painfully obvious that I think a lot of the things that we put up with, we do it for the kids. And that is an obvious thing. And that is something that teachers should not take lightly, and something that teachers understand, is the fact that we are doing this for that purpose. That is the reason we get into this profession, because we love it, because we find value and joy in it. But that should not also be like the sword that we fall upon just because we are in ourselves selfless and just because we in ourselves want to do what's best for kids. It does not mean that we should actively, jump onto that situation and make it worse for ourselves, right? And I think that is the issue that a lot of the times we run into is you're doing it for the kids, so keep doing it. And I think a lot of teachers fall victim to that, and I think that's kind of a sad reality of it. And I think that is one of the biggest reasons for burnout is someone will look at you and say, "Sure, you're tired, but you're doing it for the kids." And it's an excuse we tell ourselves when we're, working on a Sunday or we are in our classroom at 7:30 at night after the bell is rung grading papers is we look at we look at ourselves and we tell ourselves it's like, "Oh, don't worry, it's like all for the kids, so it's fine." And I want people to understand that like I don't really think that mentality should go away. I think that's a big reason for things. I also just want it to change and say like, but that also shouldn't be to the detriment of yourself. And I think that's where teaching burnout comes from is this idea of we are working for this higher purpose. We are putting up with all of these things that we have to do. And we are holding ourselves to all these high super high expectations because of this purpose, sure. But like I said, at what point does that make it detrimental to ourselves? And I think that's what we need to fix in teaching because that's where it comes from. This mentality that we should feel this way because we are doing it for this higher purpose. We are doing it for the kids. And it's hard to overcome something like that. So, at what point is that not enough? And I'm gonna answer that question by going into my own personal experiences, like the master of teacher burnout. And I didn't even know that I was burnt out until I realized what I could possibly change into. And it's because last like 6 months ago in May 2024, I quit my teaching job that I had for like 8 years. And I'm not going to get into like a lot of why. A lot of why will be like in this episode, just like how I felt and how things were went. But it's not how things went. But it's not really the reason exactly. But a lot of this teacher burnout stuff is what happened over the last 8 years of my career. And that's my experience of where did this burnout come from for me and why did that end up being the thing that pushed me over the edge to quit that job, right? So I guess it starts in my first year. I would say that my first year of teaching was generally like easy. I think I fell into it like pretty into a good position. I was at a school where I could like design my own lessons. I was in a place where I was supported by my two co-teachers. I taught like half of sixth grade and like one section of eighth grade language arts, and I was able to like rely on my co-teachers for a lot of that lesson planning things like at the beginning. Eventually I was able to branch off of that, but I could basically walk in on like any random day and say, "Hey, what are you doing today?" And they would like hand me the lesson. So it was really nice to have those two teachers there to kind of like support me in that process. And, even on top of like all the first year teacher stuff that we all deal with, I think that is immediately a sense of burnout where it's like, this is what school is going to look like for me after that first year. And, I could talk for this, we could do a whole podcast about first year teaching and what that feels like and, my experiences with it, but that's not what this is about. In my first year, I learned very early that it's really hard to say no to things. And when, kids would come up to you and they'd be like, "Oh, can you like grade this? Oh, can you fix this book? Oh, can you help me after school with this project? Oh, can you can we go play soccer outside?" Like all of these things, it's really hard to like say no to them, and you don't want to because it's like you said, like you're there, like I said before, is you're there to make a difference, you're there to impact change. And I think coming into this profession early on, I was what 21 years old when I first started teaching, which is crazy. And they just kind of like throw you in there and it's like, go do this thing. And it's not that I didn't have training, right? I went to school, I did the student teaching, I did all the things, but they throw you into that first year and they're like, good luck, like sink or swim. And also in that first year, you don't get paid as much as you get because usually at schools they give you like they have like a salary schedule, and when you start your first year, like you're making that like minimum amount of money. So I was making $30,000 my first year teaching, and that was only 9 years ago. Um, and the way that I initially thought that was a lot of money was really was quickly enlightening to the fact that it's not, you guys. It's really not, even 9 years ago. So, in order to like supplement my teaching job, I would tutor every day after school. And I had worked at this tutoring company for most of my first year of teaching and before, because that's kind of like what got me in the door, as I kind of mentioned in my one of my other episodes. And every day after school would end at, contract time would be over at like 4:15. I would be out of the door by 4:30, and then I would be at the tutoring center by 4:45. And depending on how many kids signed up, depending on how many hours I had that week, like I would be there until like 9:30 helping clean up. And I was a big part of like helping run that place towards the end of my time there and in my first year, because I had done so much work there like over the summer. So I was like a big part of that place, and I would leave school, my teaching job, every day just to go and tutor for like 4 or 5 hours. And I was young, so I like made it work, but then I would wake up the next day at like 5 a.m. and do it all again, 4 a.m. and do the whole thing again. And, putting in 14-hour days for an entire week's worth of work is not something that, starts you off in the career like thinking about like, oh wow, this is going to be really sustainable for me. And I don't know that I had the foresight to realize that that mentality of saying like, oh, I can do this, like this is fine, is I made it so much harder on myself that first year, just based on the fact that I, took this time and I felt like I needed to earn extra money, and I felt like I needed to go out and do all these things because of, again, those expectations. So in my first year, I already kind of started my train to burnout, where I would leave school, my whole teaching job, I would leave that and go immediately to tutoring. And at the end of my first year, we had a unit in my language arts class in eighth grade, and it was about like argumentative writing. It was about kind of writing your own persuasive speech, is like a big thing in eighth grade at the time, where we all kind of prepare a speech, we all give the speech, and I kind of took that, and the kids of my class, they were like, "Oh my God, we should like do debates," and I was like, "Cool, we can like do debates if you guys are into that." And part of the curriculum at the time was we watched The Great Debaters, so that was also like a hint to then say like, oh my God, do we should do debates in class. And I was like, chill, like I'll look up the rules, like we'll do all of it, like it'll be so cool. And I remember we finished all of our debates. We did that. It went really smoothly. And at the end of the movie, two of these eighth graders came up to me and they were like, "Hey, Mr. Kassick, we should like start one of those." And I was like, "Start what? Like, what do you want to start?" And he's like, "We should start a speech and debate team." And I was like, "Okay, let's do it." And I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what that looked like, but I had two eighth graders that were so excited about that fact that I said yes, that I then spent that whole summer. So they told me this in May as we were finishing up our unit. I spent that whole summer working on like a proposal to give to my principal about like starting a speech and debate team. And the way that I spent like, God, probably like 2 hours every day for like that first month working on this proposal. And plot twist, homie looked at it for like 5 minutes and said, "Okay, yeah, you can start a club." And you know, going back to like feeling valued and shit, that did not make me feel very valued. I put in probably easily 20 hours of work on that over summer when I wasn't getting paid for any of it to start a new club. And homie looked at it for 5 minutes, said, "Yeah, you're good." Red flag number like 1,000. Let's be real. And, that just starts the train of like why all these red flags are popping up to me quitting that job. Anyway, so I spent the time that summer kind of working on, starting a speech and debate team so that in my second year, we started the club. We were doing that club like 2 or 3 days a week during lunch. So it was during like my lunchtime. I had like switched jobs. So it was during like my lunchtime. It worked out really well. And that was just like another thing on top of like, hey, I want this to work. Like I want to go through these things. And I'll get more into like what speech and debate kind of took over. Maybe another episode, maybe a little bit later here, but it definitely led to burnout. But it was also one of those things that like that filled my cup so much that it's hard to look at all the things I did for speech and debate and label it as something burnout, because I think, 7 out of 10 times, instead of feeling super exhausted and burnt out after anything speech and debate related, I would often feel like inspired and like uplifted and rejuvenated after doing something like that. So, I did start that for a good reason, and I think it continued for a good reason, and I found a lot of, joy and purpose in that. But that's, it also is exhausting, and I'll get into that. So for my second year, I started doing that. I started coaching that team, and it didn't really start getting anywhere until like my third year. It was the year right before COVID. It was 2019, the school year of 2019. So I want to say like literally January 2019, we had like a switch where we started doing our first tournaments, where we started, doing all of these things. And that was halfway through my second year where we really hit the ground running, and we were competing and we were practicing, and we were, by 2020, we had two kids qualify for state. And the amount of time that that takes up by itself. I did the math, and I could pull up the spreadsheet, but I don't I don't have it easily accessible. But just that in itself, like my second year all the way to even now, is speech and debate took up a lot of that extra time. And I like I said, it was something that provided me with a lot of joy and a lot of purpose and a lot of like inspiration on many days. But, spending practice on 2 times a week for 2 hours. So spending what 4 to 6 hours practicing each week, depending on how what kids needed, and then literally all day Saturday tournaments where we were literally there from like 7 a.m. to 11 o'clock at night. And I'm not exaggerating. Speech and debate coaches in the in the comments will will tell you that I am being kind of generous, to be honest. So the fact that that was like a piece that I was now upholding and trying to grow and change and effect was a big part of like what led to my burnout. Is I started this team in my second year of teaching, and then all of a sudden my year 8, we are by year my 7th year, at the end of my 7th year, we took a field trip to Arizona for a national tournament for my middle school team. And running two of those teams, a middle school and a high school team, by my 8th year, where there was my 8th year teaching, there were 40 kids on the team, and we started in my second year with like 4 or 5. And the fact that just that growth in itself is such, God, it's like I this is not a speech and debate episode, I promise. I just, when I get talking about it, I can't stop. So just know that for the purposes of this episode, while it was probably the most exhausting thing I've ever signed up for without even realizing what I was signing up for, it was also one of the things that I am still to this day like most proud of, the thing that like in my teaching career I have the most fond memories looking back on, the thing that I am happy that I chose to do, even though it was one of the substantial contributors to my eventual burnout. I think it was also one of the things that made me stick around for so long. And it's some of those kids even to like this day that like made me wish that I was still at that school. And that just goes to show you that even when you do conquer like the burnout, the fact of the matter is it's like that mentality of doing it for the kids is something that like just completely takes over. And it's hard to like imagine, you know, continuing. I'm getting like kind of nostalgic and sad about it, to be honest, because I you know what? Let's just move on from this, because like I said, this isn't a speech and debate podcast. And going into like that idea of burnout is, when I started that, it was very hard to say no, right? We kind of talked about that in my first year. And starting that team kind of snowballed into something that was just another thing that added on to my like list. So that was only my second year. We're only in year 2 right now. So year 3, over the summer I went to like a professional development and for like a week in like some mountain resort. It was a really cool experience, loved that. And then out of that I also got a soccer coaching job. So I started being the assistant coach to a soccer team, for the middle school soccer team, 2 seasons a year, 2 seasons out of the year, my bad. 2 seasons out of the year, I was an assistant coach for the soccer team, and that included like practice every day after school. That included games 2 times a week. Our seasons usually ran from like August to October, and then it was from like March to May. So there were 2 seasons, one for boys, one for girls, and I started helping out with that. And you get really used to like the rhythm of like waking up super early, staying at school. Like I think during soccer seasons at that point, I was staying at school until like 6 o'clock, 6:30, depending on conversations that need to had, game times. Some games we wouldn't get back till like 9 o'clock, and you know, it's fun. Like I said, like it's really easy to fall victim to these things because it is for the kids. It is something you're into. It is something that you're getting paid for the most part, right? I didn't get paid for speech and debate until much later, but that's for a separate podcast. But you're getting paid for, coaching, and you're getting value out of it. So I think once I started doing that while I was tired and doing like 14-hour days for 2 months straight, and speech and debate practice on top of that, speech and debate tournaments on Saturdays, I really only had like one day off when I started doing soccer. And that day off on Sunday was often spent lesson planning for the week, because I still had a teaching job. It was often spent planning, and I barely had any time to like exist for myself, because Sunday was very much just like, hey, I'm gonna go into the school and I'm gonna get some work done. I'm going to make sure my lessons are ready for the week. I'm gonna do all these things. So already by year 3, I was working, what is that, like 3 jobs at this point for this school, and only getting paid for 2 of them at that point. So the idea is it just snowballs really quickly. Not to mention, like a fourth part-time job that I had at the school was I also ran the credit recovery program. And I don't know how I skipped over that because that happened my first year of teaching in the summer. Because of my experience tutoring, a teacher had reached out and they're like, "Hey, I don't want to do this program anymore. It pays $25 an hour." And I was like, "Sign me up because I fucking need money." So my first summer is I started running that credit recovery program, and I did that every summer for the next 8 years. So my summers were then, off as well. I never really had time off in the summer. I was, doing data entry for all of that credit recovery stuff every weekend on Fridays, usually because our school didn't have um, students on Friday. We just had like a day off for everyone. So we had 3-day weekends, but I would spend my Fridays doing credit recovery. And again, while I got paid for it and while I found value in, helping the like kids who needed that extra support and needed that extra goal setting time with graduating from high school, it was also, again, it was just another additional 4 hours of my time that I couldn't spend on myself. And it was spent, you know, working myself to the bone for the school and for the kids because again, like you're doing it for the kids. So there's purpose there. And you can already see kind of like the pattern here, and it unfortunately gets worse and unfortunately gets like much much worse. So then in my fourth year of teaching, this was 2019 2020, and so we all know how the 2021 ended, right? We don't need to get into that, but that was the first year I started advising the middle school yearbook. So as a middle school teacher, the eighth graders kind of run the yearbook, and they had a person that was like, paid to advise it, and they would pick like an elite squad of like 15, 12 to 15 kids to run the yearbook. So I knew about this at the end of third year because the teacher doing it decided that it was her last year doing it. So I said, if no one else wants it, like I'll do it because it's low key one of those things that I've always wanted to do. Is I've always wanted to like run the yearbook. It's like one of those things. It's like, the cool yearbook teacher. It's like always like the coolest English teacher or whatever. It's usually an English teacher. It's like the coolest one because like they're the yearbook teacher. Like they get all these cool like perks and stuff. And I don't know. I just like wanted to be that. And then like having that higher purpose of like I get to be the one that helps decide like what is in this little memory book for the rest of time. Like that was just a really cool opportunity and I did not want to pass it up. So in my fourth year, nobody else wanted the job. That should have been another red flag. Nobody else wanted that job. So I took it. And then for the next like 4 years, I think I made 5 yearbooks with that at that school as the advisor. And it started my fourth year. So now, on top of credit recovery, on top of coaching soccer, on top of, growing the speech and debate team from nothing into national qualifiers, I was now doing the yearbook. And that is 4 jobs. And I feel like I'm forgetting something. And I was doing all of those, throughout the weeks. And like I said, still had Sundays to like work. I would start setting boundaries for myself there. And I would say, I'm leaving once my AirPods die. And, that could range anywhere from like an hour to like 4 hours. But I held pretty true to that on Sundays. I would go in, I would lock in really, really early in the morning. I would put my AirPods in and I would say, once they're dead, I'm like out of here. And, that was the boundary I set for myself because I needed time for myself to like do things. And, at this point, teachers started catching on. They're like, "Oh my God, Kassick, you're doing so many things. Like, how does it feel? Like you're anxious all the time. Like, what's going on?" And I think other teachers like realized that I was anxious. And I think other teachers realized that I was, doing all of these things. But this is where it kind of, takes like a turn. I think somewhere around my fourth year and like COVID and into my fifth year. And I'll get into like what happened in my fifth year as well, because another like kind of change happened. But I think somewhere in that 4 to 5 to even 6 year range, I started feeling like I was doing all of these things. I was putting on dances. I was taking kids to tournaments. I was creating yearbooks. I was going above and beyond and like all of these different things. And I could probably count on maybe my 2 hands, if I'm being generous, up to 10 times that I had felt truly valuable because of those things in 4 years. There were, like little things. There was like, "Oh, Kassick put on a good dance. Like, here's a free coffee." Or, "Oh my God, Kassick, your yearbook, like, it turned out so good." And like, those are just comments coming from people, right? And I think those help. But there was never like a true essence of value outside of like maybe 10 times. And you know what? Probably 6 out of 10 times that came from the students. Like a kid would look up to me and say like, "Oh my God, I didn't know that I was going to create the cover for this yearbook. Like that is such a cool thing that people get to have and hold this, yearbook. Like I have that conversation kind of like seared into my memory of a kid just being like so proud that he made the cover of this yearbook. And that was, during COVID when we were hybrid, and this kid just like had so much joy in creating the cover of this yearbook. Or, when you're winning a speech and debate tournament and a kid's like holding our first trophy for a team, right? Or, when you drive all the way to a tournament in a totally different state and buy a toaster randomly, and suddenly that is just like the icon of the entire school. And it's moments like that where the value really seeps in. But it was never coming from places where I feel like I needed it the most. It was never coming from like, peers. It was never coming from admin. It was never coming from like society. There was never any sort of recognition that it's like, hey, Kassick, like, let me just like take a second and, recognize like what this means and what this does. And sure, you can say that it was unspoken, but I think a lot of it during this time is I was working really, really hard and I was putting myself through mountains and mountains of anxiety just to make sure that I could uphold the expectations for myself and for the school and for these kids that I don't think people realized what that felt like to then not get any sort of, you know, thanks or gratitude or value or appreciation or any sort of thing like that, where it's like, it just kind of became the norm that, like, oh yeah, Kassick does that. It's going to be fine. Or Kassick does that. It's going to be great. And while that in itself is, a different kind of value, it's also, again, just like an expectation that it's like, oh, now I have this expectation on myself that this is what I have to do, and there was never anything to balance that. And like I said, I learned this in my, like, by my fourth year. I think I have little moments that I've written about that, tell the stories of these things that really just drive home the fact that I was never supported by the people that I needed supported by. I was never valued by the people I needed to be valued by. And it was just kind of like, again, this other expectation that doing these things day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out, year in and year out, I was doing these things and just like not getting that value that like made it really seem worthwhile. And it's hard to sit here and say that all that is true, and all of that is what led to like me feeling so just physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted like at all times, while also realizing that a lot of these things are what I personally valued the most, right? It has this like, there's a lot of layers there, and I think, I've written about all of these different layers like ad nauseum. I feel like, and when that story finally comes out, when all those stories finally come out, I think it'll be really enlightening. And I think that's the goal with all of this, right? Is to just like tell the story and like the longevity of it, where even though I did not feel valued or supported in all of those things, I value every one of those experiences more than I could like ever tell you. Like I value waking up at 3 a.m. on a Saturday to drive to the city an hour and a half away and spend the night in the cold at a random ass hotel, and then driving home the next morning and being on, as a teacher for 36 hours straight. I value the fact that I got to sit in a room with kids like super stressed about a yearbook deadline, and but we had donuts, we were listening to music, and we were watching random YouTube videos. And I, you know, have so many moments like coaching soccer where I'm sitting on the sidelines and a kid is just having like a visibly terrible time, or, their temper got too high, and just like sitting next to them and giving them space to, feel all the things, and like to have like a teenage boy for all intents and purposes, right? Just sit there and like finally feel okay with like feeling. And none of that would have happened if I didn't like, go and do these things. So there's this like there's this insane amount of like balance, and there's like a huge gray area where, yes, I did these things to like the detriment of myself in so many capacities. I led myself to burnout because of all of these things. And I think maybe personally things would be better off if I hadn't chosen to do all of those things. But at the same time, in that same like flip of the coin, there is nothing I would have rather like devoted my time and energy to other than those things, because I had so much value there, and I found so much joy and love and purpose and all of those things that, looking back on it with anything other than nostalgia and joy is kind of painful, right? Because you realize that those are the things that led me to burnout. And I think that's like the balance of it all, right? And I think that's why, teachers in general, they have that mentality of like, I'm going to keep going because it's worth it. And I am not one to tell you that it's easy to walk away from all of those things, because it's just not. It's just not easy to walk away from any of that. But I think sometimes you like have to, you know? And I think that's where burnout comes from, is it's also that mental battle of, this is worth it, but how long can I keep doing this? That's where the burnout comes from. It's that mental battle that you have in your head every single day on the way home. It's that mental battle that you have when you're trying to make a decision of, should I go to this basketball game to support these kids? Should I go home instead? A kid really asked me to go. Like, I should really go because this kid, like, needs a boost. He needs a support. Or should I really make that lasagna for that kid that doesn't have any food at home? Or should I, just go home and, not do it for him? Or should I not go buy snacks? Should I not order that DoorDash for the kid who forgot his lunch? Should I? And it's that constant battle of, am I doing enough? I find purpose in this. Is it too much? And that is a piece of burnout that I think adds complexities to this conversation, where you can find joy in the things you're doing and yet also feel exhausted by them. And I don't know a teacher in that I've ever met that has not gone through that battle. So I think that's a big part of it. I haven't even finished like the rest of my experiences, but I think I've hammered this point through enough in my own. But in my fifth year, I took a new job, and this was after COVID. This was like the summer of COVID. It was actually literally a day before I went to get a big jaw surgery. So in my fourth year of teaching, it was January 2020. It was almost 5 years ago at this point. I had to get a jaw surgery because I had braces for the previous 2 years from that. So like from 2017 probably to like 2020, I had braces to like correct, like some orthodontia that like wasn't right when I was a kid. I like had this really abnormal growth pattern where my jaw was like growing backwards and like cutting off my breathing. I like developed sleep apnea. It's like a whole ass story that I don't have time for right now. But in 2020 in January, 2 days, like a day before I took a few days off for my surgery that, was going to like decapitate me, not decapitate me, but, like what's that word? That like, decapacitate. Like, you guys know what I mean, where it would like put me not in a great place to like be able to get anything done for about a week. Okay. Um, First off, I took 2 days off for a major corrective jaw surgery that needed to happen. And I took 2 days off. I took 2 days off because I was so worried that I would not be back in time to help the kids, that the sub was not going to do a good job, that I was going to miss out on so many different things. And if that doesn't tell you what burnout does or what burnout feels like, then I don't fucking know what does, because the fact that I took 2 days off, I ended up taking three because I, wasn't in the place that I thought I was. But I had planned to take just 2 days off because of the fact that I was doing all of these things all at once. Anyway, I digress again. This is just me like going off on 80,000 tangents. So it was a day before I was taking some days off for my surgery that the principal called me into his office, and he was like, first of all, anytime a principal calls you into his office, my heart rate literally just increased because of the principals that I now have a lot of disdain for, let's be honest. And again, that's a story for another day. But he calls me into his office and he says, hey, like, how's it going? I just wanted to let you know of some things before like we release them to like the whole staff, because there are like some changes that are going to happen, blah, 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 blah. Basically, they're getting rid of like an elective for reading. So in our school, we had like English language arts classes, and we also had an elective for reading that every kid took in sixth and seventh grade. And that was meant to help them just with like reading skills, standardized tests, state tested subject. They needed lots of support in reading. They were like, we're getting rid of that class. It's basically a waste of time. And I was like, it's about fucking time, because that class is a waste of time. And they said, we're going to replace it with a class meant to help students like grow their skills in school and just like adjust to middle school. And we're going to call it leadership. And they said that I was going to be teaching that class. I did not get any say in it. I did not get to say no. He basically said like, hey, think about it. We think you're the best one for the job and this affects you the most. And they called me in before anyone. I was the first one to learn about this. And this was towards the end of the day during my plan time. I was, making sub plans. I was getting ready for my surgery. And I I remember just like walking out of that office and back to my classroom just like in a daze. I was so confused. I was so like I don't know how they can turn something so like disrespectful into something that felt flattering, but looking back on it, that's exactly how it felt. Like I was like, okay, so you're gonna like basically say that if I don't take this job, like I don't have a job here. And then while also saying like you're the best one for it. Like we really wanted you to do this. Like we created this class with you in mind and we really want you to like run with it and do it. And then again to like not have any support because going into 2020, I basically had to design that whole curriculum. So that summer, and then like that whole time over my surgery, I was just thinking about what this meant and like the implications of it and all these different options. I still have a note saved in my notes app on my phone about like the potential to like not be the one that teaches this class because I already found so much joy in what I was doing. So for them to then say like, hey, you're not going to do that anymore, you're going to do this brand new thing and we're not going to take your thing into account, your opinion into account. Again, it's that thing of value. Like, do you value me at all, or do you value like your ideas more? Anyway, that was my fourth year. And, I spent that time in recovery from surgery thinking about it. And then that entire summer, I redesigned like a whole curriculum. So, on top of like, planning for class and doing speech and debate and doing credit recovery that summer, I was also redesigning a curriculum. And if that's, I hope that this sounds insane because this is not, I feel like this is, I'm not trying to like pat myself on the back. Like I hope that's not how this comes off. Like I hope this doesn't come off and say like, "Oh yeah, like cool, you did all this shit for your school. Like I bet you're so happy or whatever." And that's not the point of me telling all this. I'm literally telling this in the context of like teacher burnout and maybe this is not what to do. And I know I talked about for a long time about all the joy and stuff I got out of it, but I'm not trying to brag because I am not saying to do this. I am literally not. Like this is not the move, you guys. Let me tell you, okay? And I'll get into that as well. So that was my fourth year. Into my fifth year, I had a new job, new curriculum. I designed it all on my own. Didn't get a lot of support in what that looked like. I ran it by the people at the top of the ladder a couple times. They're like, "Yeah, sounds great," and I was like, you didn't even fucking look, bro. So what am I even doing here?" And that continued throughout my sixth year. I was teaching that class for a while. I was redesigning everything all the time. Again with kind of like out any support without any value in like what that is and what that does. I still really value the stuff I did in that class, and I don't think that anybody else realizes because it was an elective, and I don't think that you know being an elective teacher gets the support and value it deserves. But I really felt that at that time, where it's like I went from teaching English, like the highest state tested subject like of all time besides math, and then teaching an elective and then seeing like the just the disrespect and like the lack of value that people like give to that is like a whole different perspective on education that I have and that I had that kind of like changed how I viewed things. And then, my sixth year, I did that whole thing again. My seventh year, I changed jobs again because there were like some other issues that came up with admin that basically said, like, hey, you're going to have to do it this way. And I said, I don't want to fucking do it that way. So I'm not going to do it. And I went back to teaching English. So for my last 2 years at that school, I taught seventh grade language arts I taught three sections of it, which was six classes. So because of the way that like the schedule worked out. And that's what I did for the past 2 years. So on top of going back into English, I also was still doing the yearbook. I was still doing credit recovery. I was still doing speech and debate. I was still coaching soccer, and all of those things kind of like piled on to like the end of my eighth. God, I think I remember posting something on my Instagram at the beginning of my seventh or eighth. I think in my brain it's my eighth, where it says I took a picture of my classroom and I said, "Here's to finding the joy again in teaching." And going 8 years into it and still having all of that joy that I talked about that is like very real, to then realizing that it's like, shit, do I even have any joy in this profession anymore? And it was because of that burnout. So, all of those expectations, all of those things that I have signed up to do, all of those things that I have created then became what led me to feeling this like sense of like, am I even finding any joy here anymore? And at the end of my eighth grade year eighth grade at the end of my eighth year of teaching, for that and among so many other reasons, and there's a bunch of layers to like why I eventually decided to quit this job, was the fact that I was burnt out, and I was able to like finally recognize that within myself. And sitting in that final meeting with like my principal and the big boss man director, is I deserve so much better than what I was getting there. And I deserve not to have to feel burnt out all the time. And I think that's the conversation that kind of leads into like, okay, how do we then avoid this, right? And I guess we can kind of talk about like what burnout looks like. And I think for me it really boils down to just like I was not finding like the joy that I had before. And I think that's what you look for in people when you're like talking about teacher burnout is it's like, are you enjoying this? Like, are you having a good time? Are you sleeping? Are you taking care of yourself? And throughout the past like 8 years, I had those moments, right? I don't think it could have been it could have been a lot better, but I did have those moments of like, taking care of myself and finding value in all of the things. But there was a lot of times where I was just like, I wasn't sleeping. I was gaining a lot of weight. I was not finding joy, and that's a big one. I was not able to like sit down for a hobby and enjoy it. I think I realized last year, my eighth year of teaching, is I didn't like turn on like a to play a video game or like to read a book, and I just like could not. One, I couldn't give myself the patience and the time to say like this is worth it. No matter whatever else you have going on, like this is worth it right now to sit and read, to sit and play a video game. And I could just never tell my brain that that was the right choice. So I would just sit and like anxiously lie on the floor and watch, TV and YouTube videos because I was trying to distract myself. That's what it looks like. I was tired all the time. I was gaining weight. I wasn't finding joy in the profession. I was not being able to enjoy a lot of my hobbies, and the just the perseverating and the overthinking of like just the anxiety of why am I not feeling joy? Why am I not getting valued with all of these things? Why am I putting all this time and effort into these things and then getting nothing out of it? And I think unfortunately that is like the teaching mentality. It's these expectations we put on ourselves. And, I sit here and like I complain about it. And I know like, former students or former colleagues that are listening to this are being like, holy shit, like what? He wasn't enjoying any of that. And it's hard to like delineate these things, right? Because it's like if I was feeling burnt out, then I wasn't enjoying it. And that's not necessarily the case, right? They're both can be true at the same time. I can be burnt out while also still enjoying it, and that is so true. Like there, like I said, so many moments of this while even in the midst of like, weekly panic attacks, or, monthly, just like complete crash outs. There was also so much joy there and so much laughter and so much just, inspiration in it all that I think it's really, they both can exist at the same time. And I think one of them overshadows the other every now and then. But I kept going because again, we're doing it for the kids. We're doing that for this purpose. And now having been on the opposite side of this for the past few months, and being at a new school now where I'm able to kind of leave work at work, where I am assistant coaching like a speech and debate team, but the amount of responsibilities I have decreased exponentially. I am just a teacher. I teach special education, so there's a lot of like paperwork involved, but I am just a teacher. I assistant coach, and then I get to fucking go home, and I get to you know learn in grad school. I get to like play video games. I get to make sourdough. I get to record TikToks. I get to do all of these things that kind of, sure, I still have like my moments. I still have a panic attack every now and then. I still feel very much burnt out. And all of that to say, it's like there is space for doing things that matter, and there is space for all of this work and effort, but it doesn't have to lead to crashing out. It doesn't have to lead to burnout. And I, having been, like I said, on this side of it for the past semester, is I'm realizing that there's like a better way to do things. And I don't regret anything, any choice that I made. I don't regret signing up to do all of those things. Never in a million years would I look back and say, damn, I wish I didn't, go to Arizona for the speech and debate team for a week and not get any sleep and have emotionally draining conversations and sit in a hot desert and walk around to school 8,000 times trying to quell all the conflict that arose. I never regretted staying late on a Zoom call to finish a yearbook and calling the yearbook guy at, the wee hours of the evening after school and being like, hey, can I please have like a 2 hour extension on this yearbook? I don't regret like the seniors working really, really late on their last day to turn in credit recovery homework. I don't regret any of those things. Like, it is impossible for me to look back on those things with anything but joy and a profound like purpose and nostalgia. But I do wish that I recognized what burnout was and I was able to kind of prioritize what that looked like, because from my first year, like I said, like I was just like a baby. I was 21 years old, and this wasn't even my first teaching job. I think I got my first teaching job before I turned 21. And that fact by itself, um, I have learned so much since then. But my very first year learning that, nah, this is just the way things are. Like, you're supposed to be tired. You're supposed to be working till 9 o'clock every day and waking up super early and just grinding through. Like, that's what having a career is. And it's not. It's just not. And not to say that I'm like enlightened now because I finally made the choice to like be better, but there are a lot of things I think that can help teachers from feeling burnt out. And I think a lot of it is prioritizing. I think you can sign up for all the things you want, but do the things that give you joy. Prioritize the things that give you joy, that fill your cup, that give you time to rest, because it's really easy to all of a sudden be coaching 8 different things, having 3 different jobs, and then being able to excuse it by saying, "Oh, it's for the kids," and it happens so quickly. But I think being able to prioritize that, like if I were to be able to prioritize that, I should have stopped doing credit recovery way longer. I should not have done that for 8 years. That is the one thing that, even though I was making $25 an hour, which really helped, because I didn't make a whole lot of money and I still don't make a whole lot of money and I miss that. But I should have quit that like a long time ago, looking back on it in retrospect, because I was not giving it the time and attention it deserved. Sure, I enjoyed doing it, but someone else who wasn't doing 4 other jobs could have done it so much better. And it's those kind of things that, like, having those conversations with yourself, that it's like, I'm going to give this thing up so that I can prioritize the value I get out of this other thing. And then that loosens some of your own expectations, right? Where it's like, had I not spent 4 hours every Friday morning and 2 hours on Saturday every now and then working on credit recovery, I could have had 6 extra hours, and I spent more time on credit recovery than that. But the point is, like, I could have traded those 6 hours for doing yoga. I could have traded that for going for a run. I could have traded that for the therapy I still desperately need. I could have traded that for lesson planning, right? I could have traded those hours and prioritized them in a much more productive way, because I didn't realize at the time that it was okay to let it go, right? And I think it's the first thing that, like, how do you fix it, is you learn how to prioritize the things that should matter, and you have those honest conversations with yourself, and it's like, am I getting value out of this thing, or am I getting more value out of this? Would this help me be better at something else? And I didn't know how to have that conversation because I was still learning about myself, and I'm still learning about myself, and it's those kind of tough conversations that kind of can get you out of burnout. I think I should leave this one to the end, but I think you should go to therapy. If you are in any sort of helping profession, if you are an adult, if you are a child, if you are a person existing in this earth, I feel like you should go to therapy, because everyone's got shit they have to deal with. Everyone has problems processing things. Everyone has emotions. Everyone goes through stuff that is just too heavy sometimes to exist with all on your own. And especially now, having been introduced to like the counseling profession and like therapy and techniques and like just the joy of what that can be, like, the success and the goals that you can create there, everyone should go to therapy. And that helps. I started therapy in 2020. I had a therapist that I didn't really vibe with, so I changed. I found a different guy, and it was free through my insurance for the most part, because it was through telehealth sometimes. And he led me to like discover a lot of things about myself, and I learned how to like exist in the world a little bit more freely and a little bit more, um, safely for myself. And I don't even have like a lot of those like big T traumas that people go to therapy for. Like, you don't have to have a big trauma. You don't have to have like a reason to go to therapy. Therapy is preventative. Counseling is preventative in its best form. And that's what I've learned for this past like semester, is in every book and every technique and every sort of conversation about anything, is counseling is preventative work, because you are doing the work to know how to better work with your life and how to better like adapt to your life in changing situations. And the more skills you have before something bad happens, the better off you're going to be. So Therapy is really, really important. I'm in therapy now. It's really expensive, so I'm trying to like make it work, but it's it's worth it. It's scary, it's terrifying, it's challenging. It's some days you're just going to be like, "Why the hell am I doing this?" And then all of a sudden you'll wake up and you'll have just like a different perspective on things. And it's a slow process, but teachers especially, like there's a thing called secondhand trauma, and if you've taught for more than a couple years, you know like what secondhand trauma looks like. If you've taught longer than like a month, you know what secondhand trauma looks like, and that grates on you. So to have like a third party who is literally their whole job is to just show you what you feel and help you process it, everybody needs that. So my advice is to go to therapy. Go to psychologytoday.com, and I'll link it somewhere. But psychologytoday.com literally like will go to your area and it'll tell you all the available therapists. You can like do it by like a diagnosis, which if you have one, if you have a diagnosis like all of us diagnosed girlies, then like you can search through that. You can search like by gender, you can search through like sexual orientation, you can search through all of these different facets on a filter in Psychology Today that will like find you a perfect therapist. And maybe that won't work and you can find something else, but that's a really good place to start. So we have so far to prevent burnout, prioritize your situation, go to therapy. And the last one, and this is one that I did, and it really helped me through. And it was advice that I got in my, undergrad when I was learning how to be a teacher. And it said, my professor always said, shut your door and teach. And I think about that all the time. Like I always teach with my door open, which is kind of ironic, right? I always wanted my classroom, like my little corner, Kassick's little corner of the school. I always wanted that to be like a safe place. So I kept my door open, like literally kept my door open at all times, to the detriment of like teachers around me because my room was kind of loud sometimes. So I always kept my door open. But the mentality of shut your door and teach goes so much more beyond that. It says like when like the world outside of your little classroom gets too overwhelming, or when your own personal world is a little too overwhelming, you can just shut your door and you can do the job that you know how to do. You can shut your door and teach. And some days I would walk to my door and it would be open like the doors I would be in, and I would literally just shut it. I would take like a deep breath, and wow, I just like naturally like took a deep breath when I said that. And I would take a deep breath and I would go into my class and I would just say, great, I shut my door and I can teach. All that other shit that I have to deal with can be dealt with later. For right now, I am in my classroom with my students and I am teaching. And that's the only thing that got me through a bunch of that stuff, is just saying that I'm here to do this job for these kids right now. Everything else can come later. And did that help prevent like burnout? I don't know. I mean, I still ended up quitting, but I think in the moment being able to like ground myself with where I needed to be really helped kind of like center myself in that. And that wasn't even therapy. That was just a one-off thing my professor said in college. So coming from me, like I've been teaching for 9 years. I don't have like a whole bunch of experience, but I have done a lot of stuff. I have vast experiences in education over 9 years. Like I kind of took like the fast route to most of these things. So I do know what I'm talking about, I promise. And I can go more into that kind of stuff if you want. But the idea here is burnout happens very quickly to teachers, more so, I think, than others. And sometimes you don't realize it when you're in that position. And you can find all the joy and heart in the world in what you're doing and still feel like the sense of burnout. So if you get anything from this episode, just realize that like you're not the only one that's experiencing this. And it's not easy to like get out of, and it's not easy to recognize. But if you know, are going back to school after winter break and you're kind of like dreading it and you're really just not finding the joy in it anymore, just really take some time to like think about that. Like, what does that mean? What does that feel like? What does that look like? Because before you know it, it's going to take over a little bit. And I think it took me a long time to realize that. And it took me a long time to like accept that, because 8 years later, I, you know, don't feel as burnt out anymore. And it's because I finally recognized that I was. And I think with that bar of a line that I just said, I think that is, there's a lot of bars in here. I got to write some of this stuff down. Anyway, I think that's where I'm going to end for today. I don't know how long I've been yapping. Oh my God, I've been recording for an hour. That's crazy. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was kind of therapeutic for me. I think there were a lot of moments in there I was looking back and realizing like how far I've actually come. I don't know how many people will end up seeing this in the world or not, but I got a lot of more stuff. I got a lot more stuff to say about this. So if you like this episode, leave a comment, leave a review, only if it's good, because I I'm gonna I'm gonna cry if anyone is writing me bad reviews. I probably won't cry, but yes, I will. Let's be real. Okay. So anyway, leave a comment, leave a review, like it on whatever platform you're on. If you want to be a guest and you want to come on and yap with me, if you're a former student, former colleague, a teacher that, wants to that has resonated with any of this, send me a message somewhere on slide into my DMs, bro, and we'll get something set up. You can find me on all the social medias under Kassick's Corner, Kassicks corner, like corner, you know how to spell that. And I will, see you in the next one. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. Thanks for being you. I'll see you in the next one.